Okay. So our intention for this episode that we are bringing our own experience and wisdom to the table here, that we are here to offer insights and tools to our audience, and that we are fulfilling our higher purpose by doing this collaboration.
Amen.
It's like, let's go rock this.
Yeah.
Anything you want to add to that intention?
No, it's a lovely intention. I think the intention is to be present today in this, doing this together, not worrying about fears, not worrying about our fears. Yeah, just let's be ourselves.
Let's be ourselves. Alrighty. Welcome back to the Ariadne Project. This is Kira Marie and Tania Tuck.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you so much for joining us again.
My pleasure.
Tania and I are doing a series where we are addressing common stressors that come up for all of us in our lives at some point to some degree. Tania is an emotional wellness coach and a certified DeMartini method facilitator. And we are combining our skills and our talents here for this collaborative series that each week we're addressing one of these stressors. We've covered stress itself and depression, and we continue to look at some of these things that are going to come up for us. And because Tania has a background in education, and because we have this shared interest in our own personal growth and enlightenment, that we get excited when we are able to share these tools with our audience and really help people live their very best lives. So Tania, thank you so much for this opportunity to be doing this collaboration with you.
Well, I'm loving it, Kira. So thank you for having the genius to be part of this with me.
This has been so delightful for me. Each week, we begin our episode by addressing a question from our previous topic. So last week we covered depression. And so one of the questions that came in is to really identify this space between where can we use these tools and these skill sets that you've given us, and where does it get to the point where we actually need to seek further intervention, medical interventions, things like that, that there's a lot that we can do with these tools, but when do we know that we've crossed over that space where we can kind of really address it just on our own in this way?
Well, I think that everybody's unique. And so firstly, if you're feeling depressed, you need to journal about it. I would suggest that you write down how you're feeling for a month, say, and see if it's happening to you in a way that you can spot that there's a cycle to it. Because I used to know someone who, there was a 4-week period, and there'd be 1 week where it would be descending, and then there'd be a whole week where he was in this deep gloom, and then it would lift out, but it happened in a similar pattern. Now, to me, that's a big indication that there's a chemical imbalance going on, and that this is something that perhaps needed some intervention. However, if you've just had an event that's happened, or an expectation of something happening that didn't happen for you, and you know you're depressed about that, try some of the tools that we talked about in the series, the episode before, but really look at all the ways that you can actually help yourself through changing your diet, looking at your sleep, making sure that you're journaling, making sure that you're talking about what's going on. See if you can actually find someone who could be like me, who could actually help you structure your tools, give you tools to be able to handle that. Because that's definitely my first step. And only after that, go to a doctor and see if there's something else that could be done. Because for most of us, our depression is transient. It's there for a reason. It's a feedback mechanism to us that something we considered should be happening is not. And we're actually, our lives are getting a feedback to say, shift something, change something. Be courageous, make a decision, change something about your reality. And then amazingly, you can see your depression lifting as soon as you start to take action. And your body will give you feedback that you're on the right path.
I love that idea. It's like, okay, listening to our own inner wisdom, what is our body telling us?
Yeah.
And once we've tried these interventions, and to really focus on what is my sphere of influence, what do I have control over?
Right.
Because, you know, what are these things that get us into depression often are associated with feeling out of control.
Yeah.
So this very much ties right into
Yes.
our next subject, being anxiety and fear. That how often does, you know, this depression then turn into these anxieties and these fears? So that's what we are here to address today.
Yes, and I have to say they go hand in hand usually. Fear and anxiety can actually trigger depression, and there's a part of fear that lives in this fantasy place that depression also lives in that you're thinking about something that is about to happen or could happen in the future, and you don't necessarily look at exactly what the truth is, because let's face it, your body cannot really determine the difference between something you're thinking about might happen and what really is happening. It literally listens to you and your thoughts and takes it all for real. So this is where we want to delve in a little bit today. I want to start, though, by saying that there's a universal law here that I want to introduce, and that's the law of conservation. And what does the law of conservation state? Well, it states that you cannot create or destroy anything. Everything gets transformed or transferred into a new form. Why does this relate to fear and anxiety? Well, because fear and anxiety usually come about for different situations. Usually you have fear if you think you're going to lose something that you love or really are attached to. So, for example, think about new mums and dads and how they feel about their babies that are arriving. You know, they think about what's going to happen. They daren't touch the thing. They don't know how to put it in the car. They treat it, you know, they treat it with kid gloves because they fear the loss of it, because they cherish it so much. But you also might fear the gain of something that you don't want. For example, if you're an athlete, you don't want to get an injury. So you fear the fact that you might, because it would mean that you can't be in the next season or become a professional or something like that. So there's fears in those levels. But you might have a fear of something because of something that happened in the past that had a pain attached. So, for example, a car accident in the past might mean that you're very fearful about getting in a car or going on a certain style of road because that's where it happened in the past. And you've got all of these triggers in you that actually cause fear symptoms. And have you ever had that experience, Kira?
Yes, and I think it's interesting that you talk about these things that are feedback mechanisms like the depression as well, that, you know, fear is supposed to be educational for us to you know, to help keep us safe, but then at what point does our emotions, you know, our emotional system start to hijack it and then play out to these, you know, scenario developing to fearing things that haven't even happened yet. Because for me in my life, I very specifically pride myself on the fact that it's like, oh, look at me, I'm challenging my fears. It's like I went cage diving with sharks, and I went skydiving, and I traveled by myself, and I own a 6-foot-long boa constrictor. And these typically represent me challenging my fears. So it was kind of a surprising thing to me at one point when I realized just how much of my life was absolutely driven by fear. Maybe not, fear of shark diving or having a boa constrictor, but what my fears were really, it's more the emotional fears and the what if scenarios
Right.
and these kinds of things. And it wasn't until I asked myself, it's like, what would I do if I wasn't afraid? And I started realizing, it's like, oh my goodness, my career choices, my relationship choices, so many of these things really have come down to some kind of emotional fear for me.
Right. So we have all sorts of fears that run us. We have fears of not being good enough, of fears of failure, fears of rejection. And those things, you can jump out of as many planes as you like or cuddle as many snakes. But, if you suddenly have a man of your dreams walk in, your fears will trigger because of past pains attached to relationships. So you can do some courageous seeming things, but actually your fears are in a different area of your life. Sometimes though, people have fears that become all encompassing. And I had a client once who hadn't left her house for 2 years actually, because she just felt so out of control in her world, because fears do surface when we think we won't be able to control the outcome. And for her, she had a series of things happen in her life, and she decided to put them all in the black hole. She had a place in herself that she said was the black hole. Anything that's bad or sad or terrible in my life, I just put it in there, and then I don't deal with it. I don't think about it. It's just in this place. But the trouble, yes, but the thing is that it's like having a permanent, scary space with you all the time. And along with a couple of events that had happened more recently, prior to her deciding to stay in her house, everything just became overwhelming, and she couldn't cope. And so she allowed her fear and anxiety to run her life. And I just want to remind you that there's an acronym for fear, which is fear is false evidence appearing real, meaning that it's not really happening, but we think it is. And so then that actually leads us to being in a very tricky experience, because our bodies are giving us all the symptoms, the fast heart rate, not sleeping, the worrying aspects of things. But actually, these things we've created in our imagination, or we are building upon our pains and fears of from before, and we're not actually looking at what's truly going on. Have you ever had that, Kara?
Yeah, definitely, where I spend so much time spinning out on these things that really aren't even the case. Like one of the ones for me, fears around like money or scarcity, not having enough, not being able to take care, of myself. But really, like, is this happening right now? Like you're freaking out about things that haven't happened. And is that disempowering me from actually being proactive to really address what's happening?
Right. I mean, I think that what happens is that people get stuck because their fears close down their comfort zone, and they end up just being only able to do certain things. So the fact that you skydive, I think, is amazing. And the fact that you have a snake is amazing, because what you're doing is pushing those boundaries outside again, because even though in themselves they're not that connected to where your true fears are, which are more close to home, to your heart, and what you perceive is going on, when you can have courage in a potentially scary situation, jumping out of a plane, for example, what you're doing is you're reinforming yourself, you're reinforming your body that actually, hey, I can do that. And if I can do that, then I can handle this. And you're basically giving yourself the permission to see that you are not needing to be restricted by your fears. That you can actually, if you can step out of your comfort zone here, then you can step out here or here. And it's actually, it's a great thing that you're doing all these other scary things. to help have courage in the more everyday fears that you have, that we all have. So great strategy there.
So yeah, how challenging certain fears, opens up that space for me really to challenge what are the deeper emotional fears that are going on for me, that, like what you said, it's like, ultimately these fears that tie to some, sort of core belief that, we developed early on from some experiences like that, not being good enough, or, a lot of these really more deeply rooted emotional things is really honestly more of what's going on on for me in my world than even like the surface thing that looks like I'm challenging. So what do we do to like start reframing
These false events,
these
these
false
false
events? Yeah.
the false evidence appearing real. I think you hit it on the head. Firstly, is to actually name what is the fear that I really have right now. Because if it isn't real, if it's something false that you're just projecting pain from the past, or you're worrying about something overtly, you can name a fear and go, oh yeah, this resonates with me, or oh, no, I'm being ridiculous. I'm blowing things out of proportion. So what I would suggest to do is to get really present in the now. Stop floating around in the future and thinking, well, when this happens, I'm going to be X, Y, and Z is going to happen for me. Actually get really present. And when you're there, identify the fear that you have. And then look in your past and go, what pain do I have attached to this fear? Because there's no doubt that if there is a past pain, then you can actually look at that place and balance that out. Because if you perceive that there was more drawbacks of that event than positives, then you're seeing it out of balance. So for example, you now go to that moment and look at what were the benefits to me of that happening? How did that shift what I chose to do, who I hung out with? How did it change my behavior? I mean, in terms of a car accident, I know that people drive better after they've had one. I know that they use seatbelts when perhaps they didn't. They're less cavalier about their lives. They actually care about things. They become more serious about themselves because they have had a moment where, oh my gosh, I could have died. And so they've sort of been given a gift in a way of actually taking their lives more seriously. And, if you then look at the worst thing that could happen in your future, as a young mom or as an athlete or as a lady who wants to make enough money, and, go to the worst case scenario. Think about, what is it that would I do if that really happened? What's your strategy going to be? And if you think about what fears would come up for you, how would it benefit you to have that fear? How would it benefit you to have that worst thing happen? So your path might not be going in the same direction anymore if the worst thing happens, but how's it going to be good? Because it's not going to be worse, it's just going to be different. Because the law of conservation says that you can't have success without failure. And it's going to be an equal measure, and it's going to be there, success and failure. So there is no... there's nothing to really get too scared about. If you can actually look at the worst thing that could happen and have a strategy for it.
But yeah, just shifting that perspective a little bit, because it's like, okay, looking at some of my own fears, like what has been the educational beneficial aspect of this, that feedback mechanism. It's like, okay, if I'm pushed to a pain point, it's like I made this career decision, based on my financial fears or something. It's like, but if being in this field and having these fears surrounding it has pushed me to a point where I realize actually my deeper, greater fear is living with regret of not having really gone for my dream.
Right.
That if I don't pursue those bigger, higher purposes for me, that's what, in my last breath, I'm going to be like, that's what I really wish
Right.
But but by having these fear-inducing experiences, it has pushed me to, I guess, enough of a pain point that I've had to get really real with myself. And it's like, what is the really underlying thing that's going on here for me? And so that naming it, that you talk about, and that it's not until I was able to ask myself, it's like, yeah, if I wasn't afraid, what would I actually do? And that does include a lot of like the going for my dreams and not putting up with the things that haven't been good for me because there's some idea of like scarcity or having to inject other people's values, some of these other things that we've connected to in our previous conversations.
And fear isn't there again as the thing to avoid. It's the thing to embrace, a bit like depression. It's feedback to you. You know, have you got unrealistic expectations here? You know, do you have undue worry? Are you having a life that's actually where you're avoiding things that are painful and therefore you're piling them up like my client was? And just to say on that front, what we did was I helped to reframe this black hole, because I just was thinking, you're never going to get past a black hole that size.
Yeah.
So instead we relabeled this space the forest, because in a forest everything exists in harmony, but there's also death and destruction, and there's creation, and there's everything is there. And it was like there's a path that she could walk through, and she could see each of the different things that she'd put in there, and we dealt with them one by one. But it became a much safer place for her to walk around, and she could actually enter it. And it was great imagery for her to really see how she actually did have some control. When everything wasn't bunched together as a big pile of things that are fearful or painful, yeah, she could actually look at each thing and deal with each thing. And I mean, the change for her was instantaneous. The first 2 weeks of our coaching, she did more in those 2 weeks than she'd done in the previous 2 years. And so with that in mind, she then felt more and more able to tackle the things that she'd attached pain to, and more able to handle the things that she was fearful of happening, and really checking out, is this real, or is it my fantasy or my projection about what I think might happen, which isn't going to happen. And as long as you can do that, you can control your environment. And when you feel you have some control, then you feel safer.
Well, and I find that, that interesting, because it's like, okay, challenging things in little bite-sized chunks rather than the daunting whole. And when you prove to yourself, it's like, I challenge this one thing, so that means I can also challenge the next thing, and building our self-confidence to challenge those fears and building from that. And then it's like, okay, if I can, I've worked on those things. So as the fears come in real time, it's like, yes, I'm taking this as an informative feedback mechanism. I'm listening to my body, but I'm also not letting this get hijacked by my imagination.
Right. Right. And sometimes you need to be fearful. Completely and utterly. But in our day and age, it's very, very rare that you actually need to run from a saber-toothed tiger. Sometimes you do need to. And I think that one of the reasons why we perceive that there's more reason to be fearful is because we have the news, and because we have the magazines, and we have the newspapers that are all selling media stories which are based in negative things that have happened for people. Actually, if you look at statistics about the amount of murders that happen, or the amount of knife crimes, there's not that many by comparison, but you're made to think there's a bad guy or a girl around the corner, and it's not true.
Okay, so that false evidence, and then what we focus on, because here's that, it's like, okay, there's a balance of these things. It's not like there's only bad guys out there and boogeyman, things that are out to get us. But what we focus on is what we're going to be registering, and
yes,
and that's where that balance gets.
Yes, be wise, be alert. be aware. I mean, the potential for a danger is ever present, but is it happening? No. So just listen to your body's feedback. If you feel fear symptoms, get questioning. What am I thinking about? What is going on in my mind? Where am I getting this projection from or perception from? What's really happening here? And get present now. And then start asking yourself those questions that we were talking about.
Because, yeah, that would be the point at which you can really determine, it's like, is this a legit, do I need to get out of this situation? Am I allowing my body to tell me what I need to do to stay safe? Or is this really not the root of the fear? Is this like an emotional thing or tied to the past, or,
Right.
So, okay. So in that moment, get present and start asking ourselves questions, get down to the root of what's really.
Have a strategy for your worst case scenario. It's really important, because then as soon as you know you can handle that, then anything else is a breeze.
All right. So this week, let's, in the moment when we notice these things coming up for us, this is our homework assignment to really, really start naming that thing and getting present and asking ourselves these questions. Tanya, thank you so much. These subjects that we've addressed very easily now feed into our topic for next week, that we're going to be talking about addictive and escaping behaviors.
Yes.
That how often do things like depression and anxiety and fear cause us to go into some form of avoidance, and we use addictive or escaping behaviors. And so I'm really excited to get into this conversation, because it's more than just substances. It's like this covers really such a spectrum, and I think this is such an important, hugely important topic for our time. So
Great.
I'm really looking forward to our next episode.
Me too.
Any of you that do have specific questions that you would like to ask Tanya about what we've covered here, this anxiety and fear, please message us. I will post links and connections where you can ask this question, and we will be answering that next question at the beginning of our next episode. And we also, at the conclusion of this series, will be hosting a private webinar event. Tanya is graciously offering us this opportunity where we can come and ask some of our specific questions about these subjects. We're creating safe space. It will be a private event, so we do have this opportunity to get real and vulnerable with each other and really get into the nitty-gritty of what is going on for me personally. This is an amazing opportunity, and I'm so excited to be doing this with you, Tanya.
Well, me too. And sometimes it just needs to have a forum for conversation. So if you're interested in these subjects and you would like to know more, we'd love to have you.
I will definitely be posting all the links and the connections in the show notes, and we look forward to our next conversation with you. Thank you so much for joining us on the Ariadne Project, where we are putting concrete tools in your own hands to help you live your very best life. Tanya, thank you so much for your wisdom, your time, and your expertise. I am so grateful for this opportunity and for you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Kira.
Until next time, in light and love, this is Kira Marie and Tania Tuck. Take care.
Bye for now.